And now I'm welcome on stage Peter from Coin Center, Lefteris, you too. Please join us. And Fatma, please. Yeah. This third one will be tough. Whatever you want, you can lay down, like what will be the most comfortable for you. Or maybe I will be this one for you. So we will exchange. We have 3 mics, but the third is not that suitable. So first of all, let me introduce, wow. Now we will have a proper streaming. So it's a big pleasure, for me to have people coming from the States, from Neukölln. You live here? No, I mean like which district? Ah, you see, like we have pretty diverse ways of getting to our events. And what's important for this panel that every year, I guess, there are critical topics with privacy. And somehow it's the same topic again and again within the intersection, legal issues or challenges and privacy itself, how we interact with the governments across the world, how we dependent on the foreign governments, stuff like that. And at the same time, within Lefteris example, I want to tackle what community could do to tackle those issues, especially when it comes also to funding. And here it really rhymes with Safri's talk on like how to fund the project. And at the same time, one of the most often questioned within the privacy community was like what we could do within the Tornado Cash case, Samurai case, you name them. Especially when those people, they've never been activists, maybe they were just coding, researching, or doing marketing campaigns on Twitter. Lefteris Rotki, Fatma Swarm, Peter from Coin Central. A small round of applause, please. And actually, I have a super generic question, but I found it super important right now. How you define decentralization?
Ooh. Do I really have to start? Okay. So decentralization. That's a very hard thing to define. Decentralization. Centralization is basically not relying on one central authority for something, not having someone decide everything, but in the concept of crypto and blockchain, it can be many different things, but it's not black and white. This is probably the most important thing because there's many people who accuse a project saying, okay, this is not decentralized, or this is decentralized. Do what they do and do not do what these guys do. These kind of extreme views are actually hurtful to the concept of decentralization. We should try to, well, progressive decentralization is a term, but I kind of hate it because it's almost always used to justify not doing things the right way and taking shortcuts everywhere. But decentralization is basically not relying on one person, one entity, and it can be for many things. It can be decentralization of development, decentralization of governance, decentralization of well, governance is decision making. Yeah.
I think the answer is very subjective, and it's good that there is no one typical definition for decentralization, and this is by design because this is a decentralized field and there is not one authority that can define it properly. For me personally, I would not distinguish decentralization with censorship resistance and permissionlessness. So I think something is decentralized if it also has these 2 other features. And obviously, as you said, it's on a spectrum. But if one needs permission or can be censored from a network, then definitely this network is not decentralized, at least in the way I understand it.
So we at Coin Center, the people that read our website most are probably people at the SEC and FinCEN. So when we make a public statement about what is decentralized, we have to be careful because it could influence people who want to bring prosecutions. That might be an optimistic view of our ability to influence people, but it's possible, and so we try and be very careful. And because of that, we've always pushed for, to me, it's a nonsense to have a regulatory body like the SEC or the DOJ count the number of nodes or count the number of developers and have some sort of magic threshold where if there's like 50 plus 1, suddenly it's sufficiently decentralized, because those numbers are arbitrary, and the actual accounting of whether this project has reached this magical threshold is going to be so chaotic and unpredictable and arbitrary that it just would lead to infinite prosecutorial discretion, basically. And we see this in legislation that's been proposed to Congress in attempts to define decentralization as some sort of robust test of sort of the number of participants and how federated the power amongst the participants are. So when we've written about this in the context of cryptocurrencies, we said there's something very important that separates Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the follow-on innovations from Web 2. We don't usually use the word Web 3 because in the US it's especially become like an Andreessen Horowitz buzzword, in which case it's like not always credible. But what we say is, look, the big difference is anybody can participate in the protocol that adds data to the ledger, that writes, and that anyone can read from that ledger. Now, it might be pseudo-private because maybe you can only read one fact from the ledger, like there's no double spending. You can't see addresses. But anyone can write and read, and anyone can write and read the software that powers the protocol. So you've got basically two conditions. You've got free and open source software that powers the essential elements of the protocol, and you've got a competitive system of block creation and validation that anybody can participate in without getting some sort of credential from a centralized authority. So commonly available hardware for mining, or a relatively well-traded liquid token that you can purchase in order to stake. That's our metric. I think that does merge it a lot with this notion of permissionlessness, but to us that's actually what's sort of fundamentally important in the discussions in Washington, D.C., and I often wish we weren't having a discussion about whether something's decentralized or not. I want to have a discussion about whether it's permissionless. We also make reference to sort of microeconomic theory, which is the reason why it's important is not that there's actually 50 different competing miners on the Bitcoin blockchain. It's the fact that somebody could, with relatively low startup costs, start participating in that system. And so the system might not be competitive in the traditional economic sense, but it's contestable, which is an economic term. The barriers to entry are low. And so there's no fiat, there's no gating to participating fairly on this network. That's what we would call decentralized for the things that matter. And it's really more a concept of permissionlessness for us.
And then here in this industry, we hear each year, revolution, let's make a revolution. And I'm like, what kind of, how it will look alike? And then it leads to how you would describe the nature of relationship between government or governments and the protocols and the people who are doing those protocols or solutions. Like how you would define as some sort of your personal view on that relationship in between those sectors, specifically with that decentralization in between between them.
Okay, good question. So how are protocols connected to governments of nation state?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Yeah, actually, this is part of my talk tomorrow, so thanks. I have a talk tomorrow in DAPCON at 10:30, so I will talk more about that. But the idea, at least in my head, of what protocols, what the Ethereum blockchain, what the Bitcoin blockchain can do for government is it can eliminate corruption and it can promote radical transparency of government, of bureaucracy. This is the good case if that happened, if it was used, because so all of the protocols that we use in the main chains like Bitcoin and Ethereum, they are completely transparent. There is no privacy at all there. And that's good for government, for being able to see how something is decided, how something is funded, where is your funds spent. But then there is the other scenario that is actually very dangerous, and it's to move everything and have everybody completely visible on-chain, and that is totalitarian regimes' wet dream. Basically, track everybody, be able to see what everybody is doing. So our technology has the power to create something beautiful, but it also has the power to be used to create I don't remember the name of the episode of Black Mirror, but the one where they track everything and they see that you are paying with CBDC-like thing. Yeah. So that's it.
I'm going to go back to the topic of censorship resistance, because I think the tension right now between at least regulators and the tech, the crypto blockchain tech that we're working on, at least more on the cypherpunk end of the spectrum, is the drive of regulators to try to capture or control or have these networks comply somehow with their regulation. And the way that law and regulators know how to do is by finding these centralized points of control. From the blockchain perspective, it could be seen as centralized points of failures, but that is up to people's discretion. To then force the actors that have control over, for instance, the front end or the project itself, depending on where in the inception of the project we are, to make some design decisions that would align the project with whatever these regulators deem to be right. And I think that the Tornado Cash case is a very good illustration of why this leads to very absurd realities. So I think here it's interesting to put in parallel the situation of Alexei in Europe, so in the Netherlands, and how the proceeding went for him, and the current outcome, which is still pending the appeal, so it's not final. And compared to the other developers or co-founders that are in other jurisdictions. And the fact that the laws, so far at least, seems to be very different for each of them, and how they apply to them, what they are supposed to do, and the consequences that they suffer is also very different. But we're talking about a technology that is supposed to be global. So who gets to decide, like which authority, which government gets to decide which way the technology has to go? I think this is a very legitimate question to ask ourselves, whether the project can decide very, agreeably to opt for one jurisdiction and be like, okay, I will follow whatever I think compliance means in the US, which is still also an open question. There are proceedings pending against the sanctions against Tornado Cash, so it's not even clear whether these are legal or what one must do to comply with them. But for me, it all boils down to surveillance. So one can censor something that one can see. If no one knows what's happening, then there isn't much to censor other than to censor the whole thing. And as much as you would be at home, sorry, I'm taking a long time, but it's my favorite topic. You're at home, you close the curtain, you can do and say whatever you want, and as long as no one knows, then no one can come after you. Then we can apply the same reasoning for blockchain technology, and I think there's no way around privacy becoming a de facto once the technology is advanced enough, because we shouldn't be surveilled by some subjective governments that doesn't apply to us.
So governments and protocols, they have like a more libertarian Texan American perspective. I'm not from Texas, I'm from New York and DC. But I just want to be left alone. CoinCenter's mission is not to advocate for government usage of blockchains. It's not to advocate that government should favor blockchains in the law. It's honestly that we just want equal treatment and our constitutional rights. Because if we get equal treatment and our constitutional rights, we can build these things how we want to build them. And then they will be, I think, superior to other systems out there. Market forces will prevail, and these technologies will hopefully do a lot of good in the world. That might be a little naive, but that's sort of the basic premise. And so what do I mean by equal treatment? Well, here's an interesting relationship between a government, the US government, and a protocol, not any of our crypto protocols, but the SWIFT interbank settlement network. Does everyone, show of hands if you know what SWIFT is? Yeah, this is a good room. So, you know, SWIFT handles billions of dollars in transactions globally and connects to banks all over the world, including in sanctioned jurisdictions. And they sometimes debank banks when there are specific laws in Belgium that are passed to try and say you can no longer deal with this bank. But for example, when they connect an American who is a customer of Bank of America to a Cuban bank, they don't end up liable for that American paying a sanctioned person in Cuba. They will relay that message, and they will not be directly liable for the content of the message. And if you read their frequently asked questions website and their compliance page on sanctions, they say, sanctions is the responsibility at the endpoints. We're a neutral communications network. And of course they are, and they need to be, because the global economy would fall apart if we started, you know, having sort of several centralized points of control over something that's supposed to be a networked good, interbank settlement. You just grind the entire world economy to a halt. And there are some politicians now who seem to want to do this in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, in wake of the rising power of China. So maybe it will all collapse, but at least for the moment, SWIFT gets this interesting favored status as a true communications intermediary. Even though, and I'll make this brief because now I can just connect this to what we were just talking about, even though they have 10 times more actual control and knowledge of the messages that they're relaying than Alexei and the Romans ever had with Tornado Cash. So, you know, I just want equal treatment with the legacy financial system. They get a lot of slack, and probably for good reasons sometimes, and probably for very bad reasons other times. I just want the rule of law, equal treatment. I also want the First Amendment in the US, which means developers who are building these tools the right way, which is mostly just publishing software, not engaging in a lot of trust me type conduct, not doing a lot of ICOs and things like that, they can't be regulated because they're actually engaged in expressive conduct. And I also like the Fourth Amendment, which says that the government can't just hoover up all my private data without a warrant before a judge, which is how all mass surveillance works in the US, which you might say, well, Peter, your Fourth Amendment seems to be worth about bullshit, and we're trying to change that.
And then returning to the question, like what the community could do, especially when many people don't know how to self-defend in terms of when they're participating in hackathons, for example, or when they are a part of that dev community. Like how you would perceive, should they wear T-shirts, like what kind of advocacy should be presented within the communities, especially in the, when on the background, if you check CoinDesk or whatever big media writing within the industry, they almost never write properly on privacy, the last year especially. When they were like funding, they were writing, yeah, 100 millions were poured into privacy protocol. And then it reminds security market that usually when the hack is there, the media highlights kind of like the nature of relationship with the market. So generally speaking, what people could do, how do you think?
Yeah, good. They can wear T-shirts. I have wear one. It's nice. But I cannot say anything about advocacy or legal or governments. I have no idea. I'm just a developer. They can actually, though, develop. You know, this is what cypherpunks did. They wrote code, and they still write code. So you can write code that respects people's privacy. You can actually think about what the data that your software is handling, where are you sending it, who are you sending it to, what kind of self-sovereignty do you give over the data to the user? So generally, as a developer, because that's what I can say, you really have to think and put privacy first, build local applications that that allow the users to own their own data. And for the rest, I guess I would just leave it to the guys who who deal with legal.
I'm just a lawyer, just a dev. I think I would echo what you just said. Building is the most important, and once one builds, like, you have to also ask yourself the question of, like, why you make certain decisions in what you're building, and how will this have a broader impact on the standards of the space and the behaviors that it enables. So being interested in the philosophy of it, in sovereignty questions, I think it's very important. And then just focus on building. Something I'm very excited about is just going further within just modular, composable networks. I think this would even bring more agency to the users if they can actually pick what they want to interact with, and then it would open, instead of having one single type of software like usable and applicable to all, which is kind of a weird form of uniformization, although people are using these networks are from everywhere in different cultures and have different values, have something that everyone can opt in and out. I think that would be really interesting. But yeah, I think you can talk about advocacy.
So I don't think we're at like a grassroots moment yet, where there's a lot of like on the ground, call your representative in the legislature type situations, because we're just sort of holding on right now against an onslaught of lawsuits, prosecutions, and bad regulations. And these are highly technical areas of sort of government machinery, and so that's why we need organizations out there like Coin Center, but also like the DeFi Education Fund and the Blockchain Association. And I don't know a lot about the EU landscape. I hope there are more organizations like that in the EU, but I wouldn't be the one to know who to recommend. Because at the end of the day, a lot of really important law about who's liable for building in this space, about when you actually have a right to privacy over certain data or when you don't, about when someone has to build a backdoor into a product, the precedents that will set those laws are going to be set in a bunch of really bad court cases over the next few years. Some of them in the EU, like Alexei Pertsov, some of them in the US, like the Romans, who are being accused of three different crimes for building Tornado Cash, and some of them will also be civil lawsuits. So Coin Center, my organization, is suing the US Treasury, not for holding the developers liable, that actually happened, that prosecution happened later, but simply to say it is inappropriate under US law to identify an immutable smart contract on the Ethereum blockchain as something on the sanctioned list. You don't have that power. You have the power under the sanctioned laws to identify a foreign person or regime and the property of that foreign person or regime. But software living on the Ethereum blockchain that doesn't directly benefit anyone and isn't controlled by anyone isn't property of a sanctionable entity. And so you can't actually do what you did with the Tornado Cash sanctions, at least with respect to the immutable pools. I think that's a winning argument. The problem is that you're going to need a judge to understand, you know, what the hell I'm talking about when I say an immutable smart contract in the Ethereum blockchain. And you're going to need a judge who's ready to stand up to the national security concerns, which have a tendency to make judges sort of defer to the executive branch in the US. And so these cases need to be briefed super, super well, super clearly, so that a judge in Florida, like in our case, feels it personally, understands why there are real privacy issues at stake. This isn't just a tool for criminals, and this is also about whether people are going to be allowed to build things of fundamental value or not. And so support organizations that are bringing these lawsuits, that are aiding the defense of the Tornado Cash developers. And then the one last thing I'll say is, if you are a builder in this space, please build real things. And no, I'm serious. Like, I don't think, given the tone of this room, I don't think I'm talking to the right developers here, but there's a lot of projects out there that claim to be decentralized, claim to be censorship resistant, claim to be permissionless, and it's all just garbage under the hood. It might as well just be a MySQL database. And that is a huge liability, because the judge won't know that this person isn't representative of the entire space, that there are good projects in the space, and the judge might make a law based on that bad plaintiff that implicates the entire space. So bad facts make bad law is the old expression.
Can I ask a question on this? Like, as a builder, basically, there is the US as a jurisdiction, right? Then there is every single country in the EU being a different jurisdiction. Having read as a completely non-legal person the indictment, basically the English translation, and then the machine translated thing that the Dutch authorities gave out, it's scary. It's really scary as hell, because at least to my eyes, it doesn't make sense. But what's really scary is, why would I or any other person actually build something? Of course, it would be decentralized and it would be something that doesn't give me control. But then, if, at least to my eyes, when someone did this, and just a random jurisdiction, I mean, I've only been to the Netherlands once, and that was last year for supporting Alexei's, I don't remember, it was the, yes, it is dam. And I only been there for that. I never knew much about the Netherlands before. It can be another jurisdiction, some other, like, I don't know, Italy, my home country, Greece. They can just say, okay, hey, come here, we grab you. We have this law that gives us jurisdiction over your thing because, I don't know, you were born in Greece or something. How can someone actually build like this? I would be too scared. I would go completely anon. Like, I would not touch this with a 10-foot pole, because it's, even if we solve it in one jurisdiction, then we'll get problems in another. Unless, I don't know, is there anything such as cross-jurisdiction precedents?
No, so the biggest problem is if we lose these cases in the U.S., the long arm of the U.S. is going to reach everyone. Everyone who they think is of consequence. So if your privacy tool doesn't get used by anyone, that might be okay. But if it gets used by North Korea even just once for a substantial amount of money, you're next, right? And it doesn't matter if you're in Greece or the Netherlands, or there's a handful of places that don't have extradition and that are going to stand up to the U.S. government, or are just hostile to the U.S. government, but maybe you don't want to live in those countries either. So you're right. I don't, like, if I was a builder too, I would be extremely scared, and I would probably not want to build right now. I think that we can, I'm an optimist, but I think that we can win in the U.S. on certain fundamental issues, like if what you're doing is just publishing a GitHub repository, you're not going to end up criminally liable. Now, it might get harder in situations where you're also participating in a DAO, and there's a governance mechanism, and there's a governance token, and there's profits, and there's a business concern that is sort of masquerading as something decentralized. It gets worse and worse and worse the more you layer onto that. But, like, if we lose on, in the US, you are constitutionally protected to publish software in a repository, that any kind of software that does things, important things, then we've lost everything that America supposedly stood for. I know I'm in Berlin talking about America a lot, but like that's my job. That's the world I live in. And so, like, it's very important that we get this right. We went down this road in the 1990s with the first crypto wars, when the U.S. government tried to use export control laws to ban the distribution of PGP and RSA and things like that. And we won in the courts. We didn't actually win a permanent victory. Like, the government kind of backed down and was like, oh, okay, you know, we won't put these really strict controls in place after all. And the court said, well, there's no case in controversy anymore. The government backed down, so we'll moot it, which is a really sneaky way of just like, the government lives to fight another day. That day is now, and we need to win, or the chilling effects of those decisions are going to make any reasonable-minded builder in this space just not want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. I agree.
Which brings me to the point I wanted to add a detail. I said everyone should build. That also requires research is fine, right? Publishing the code, writing it is fine. Launching a project, fundraising for it, like all of these things that become more centralized and would entail perhaps someone's liability needs proper legal research, like jurisdiction shopping. You can go and look around. There are jurisdictions that are more pro-privacy than others. There are ways to structure a project that would protect perhaps like some of the features, some of the people involved. So this is very important. The other thing is to cut that long arm of the US. Is my time up? No, it's working. So maybe I can use this one, yes. So yeah, make sure that, like, first of all, why should I be oppressed because North Korea decided to use a software? Like, isn't it enough that they're oppressing their own people? And then why should I be here impacted by a decision in the United States? Like, this whole situation now is kind of becoming very blurry and different than what we're used to with borders and jurisdictions. And I think it's really time to make things clear, and I'm really thankful for your work, actually, because it's very critical and important. But regardless of that, I don't think that we should stop building. We should just be more conscious of how we're doing it so that we don't end up in situations that, like, the builder will suffer, but the whole space too, like we're seeing, we're all impacted by whatever, like, lawsuit is happening.
Actually, to wrap it up, I would ask you, like, let's say, how really builders could not fall into a trap of gloom and doom and just opt out, like a quit industry, return to, like Afri said, we have all full-time jobs, so maybe the job would be Siemens, Vodafone, whatever corporation. And instead of that, how, you said conscious, to be conscious, like how the conscious approach to building, developing tooling and researching should be made in a nice manner, and what's actually, again, the role of the legal force here, because I know that there are lots of legal people who actually support without being too corporate, like, I mean, privacy builders and that stuff, in many chats and many behind the scene, doing basically consultancy job. How should it work in the sense of the conscious approach to building? Thanks.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question. So from a developer perspective, what exactly is the question?
From developer's perspective, how you would consciously approach building right now in this quasi-hostile environment to, on one hand, take care about your emotions and just deliver stuff instead of spread paranoia within your team, for example. Second, would you go and participate hackathons and build new tools? Would you share the knowledge with other people on yours? Maybe use case on privacy that is not hostile that much in that thing. You want to say something? Give it a second.
So there's a couple of options in this hostile regulatory environment. One is sort of playing regulatory arbitrage and trying to find jurisdictions that are a little bit friendlier. There is a risk there that you still get extradited to the US at the end of the day if your tool gets used by North Koreans. I think, like if you want to be really careful, build like Satoshi. Satoshi did what he did and didn't end up liable for it, not because he was an anon. I'm not saying, like, never let anyone know who you are. But he managed to build a protocol without ever doing a dime of fundraising, which is radical. Now, maybe it's not repeatable. There's a lot of like path dependency, and the world we're in now just doesn't allow that because, you know, all of the shit meme coins get all of the news cycles and like the enthusiasm, and so there's no way to break into it. I don't know. That's cynical, but like all he did was publish a white paper and a software client, and he ran it himself for a while. That's a way to build that I don't see how you can easily be found liable for just doing those things. Now, it's very different when you have a business around that has solicited venture capital money, that had, like, these are all things that unfortunately are pointed out in the Tornado Cash indictment. They got VC investors. There was a token. Now, I don't mention that the token plummeted in value after North Korea used the damn tool, so it's quite clear they didn't profit from North Korea using the tool, but, you know, set that aside. You have a DAO that starts to do certain ancillary things around the immutable protocol. Every gadget you add in order to spin the loop and get the network effects running is a potential liability. So if you can build more like Satoshi, build more like Satoshi. Now, I want to caveat what I just said, though, because I don't want anyone to misunderstand that I think that, say, the Romans and Alexei are liable of the crimes they've been accused of because they did those other things, like took VC money. In the US, you have a right to publish software even if you're a giant agribusiness pharmaceutical corporation with billions and billions of dollars in revenue. Our First Amendment opinions from the Supreme Court recently support big pharma, support website developers who don't want to make wedding websites for gay couples. Like, we have a very broad theory of First Amendment rights in our country. It doesn't matter if you're doing it for profit. It doesn't matter if you actually like are writing a website instead of a book. It's all protected. We need to get crypto into that broad tent, and that's the best way to protect this space. But until we do that, and maybe we fail to do that, but until we do that, build more like Satoshi, because the more you build like Binance, the more you're just going to be an easy target with very few actual First Amendment defenses and rule of law defenses.
I'm not sure if Satoshi didn't fundraise. We're just not aware of it. So this is also something to keep in mind. Like, I agree, the VC culture right now and how things are happening is very startup, Silicon Valley style. But this is also culturally quite far from where we come from. But I also think that even if Satoshi didn't build Bitcoin, it would have happened anyway. So there's also this kind of time frame that we're discussing that, like, even now if we have roadblocks, I don't think that we're never gonna see like widespread privacy tech on chain. It's gonna happen. So how it's gonna happen, this is the question. And I agree with you, like anonymity is a plus, but then this is not necessarily something we should advocate for. This is it.
Yeah, I think I understand the question better now, but still, I would never, so as a builder, I have a family, I don't want to go to jail. It's as simple as that, right? Even if I didn't have a family, why would I want to ever risk going to jail for what I like to do? So I really would advocate people going anon for privacy tech, but it would depend on what kind of thing it is. If it is something that just is more privacy-centric, I mean, I don't think you have any problems. If it is a mixer, a coin mixer, then yeah, please, like really, then 100% be an anon. Don't touch mixers with being a known person. But in general, I am also optimistic because I think that anons can do stuff, and I would still trust to use their tooling. So the optimistic view here is that even if someone, even if regulation, even if we lose those cases, knock on wood, there is no wood here, but even if we lose those cases, even if the regulatory environment is extremely hostile, both in Europe and the US, still cypherpunks will build, and there will be anons, sure, and we will have privacy tools because we are not going to lose to the machine.
Another point I think for me is really hopeful too is just looking at other form of tech and that have similar roadblocks. So what happened to Aaron Schwartz trying to open knowledge to everyone, make it free, and then the fact that there is Sci-Hub now, everyone is using it in the US, outside the US, and it has brought so much knowledge to so many people who didn't have access, the financial means, the technological means, whatever, to this knowledge, and it's super important, I think. Also, disclaimer or caveat, I think nobody here is, I'm speaking for everyone, but correct me if I'm wrong, is advocating for criminal usage of the technology or is advocating for facilitating such criminal usage. We're just talking about something very different, and unfortunately these two things, privacy or our right to have access to the technology, is usually put in contrast with this criminal usage, but it doesn't have to be the case.
Thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts on the quite important topic here. I think that there's a certain interesting trajectory that there are collectives, there are developers, there are hackathons, and also like legal professionals and the researchers as well, who kind of like play the same field, to connect with each other, with the same market, have this potency of helping each other. And I think that within many events like this, or like ETH Berlin Hackathon, we would see much more interesting nature of collaboration when that knowledge also is spread out horizontally. And generally speaking, everyone helps each other instead of fighting in chats as we see those days. It's not that productive. Thanks a lot for being with us today.